The knock didn't come like a polite neighbor asking for sugar. It was heavy, sharp, deliberate, the kind of pounding you only hear when someone wants to send a message. My wife jolted awake beside me, clutching the sheets. I slipped out of bed and moved silently to the window. The glow of headlights cut across our lawn, blinding against the blinds. 3 men stood at my front porch, black uniforms, boots planted wide, badges flashing against the porch light. At first glance, they could have passed for police. But I'd worn real uniforms. These weren't it. "Open up! HOA inspection!" one of them barked. HOA inspection. At midnight, my jaw tightened. We'd had problems with the HOA before, fines for the color of our shutters, threats over my flagpole, a warning about my truck being parked at the curb. Small, petty things. But this was different. This was a declaration of war. I signaled to my wife to stay back. She nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. I'd served 20 years in the Navy SEALs, and I knew the look of intimidation tactics. This wasn't about grass height or parking spots. This was about control. I cracked the door but kept the chain locked. "You're trespassing. State your business." The man in the middle smirked. "Violation notices. Your wife signed them. She's out of compliance. Step aside, sir, or things get difficult." My blood ran cold, not with fear, but with anger. They'd just mentioned my wife by name. Behind me, she whispered, "Don't let them in." The leader leaned closer, flashing his fake badge again. "We're authorized by the HOA board. This is official. If you resist, there will be consequences." I shut the door in his face. His boot immediately slammed against the wood. The whole frame shook. I didn't grab a gun, not yet. Instead, I moved calmly, decisively. Years of training told me, observe, gather, wait for the mistake. The pounding stopped. Then, silence. Through the peephole, the men turned and walked down the driveway. Their headlights cut across the room once more, before going dark. But they didn't leave. I could feel it. My wife held my arm. "What do we do?" I scanned the shadows beyond the window, jaw tight. "We wait." And then I saw it. Something slid under the front door. A folded paper, marked with the HOA seal in bold red ink. I unfolded the paper slowly, the ink still fresh enough to smudge against my fingertips. Final notice. Property seizure imminent. It was written like a government order, stamped with an official-looking seal, but one glance told me what it really was. A bluff designed to scare the untrained. The formatting was sloppy, the legal jargon half-copied from somewhere online. Still, the intent was deadly serious. They weren't just fining us anymore. They were threatening to take my home. The next morning, I walked the block. Neighbors peered from their windows like nervous animals in a storm. Some averted their eyes, others gave me curt nods. Whispers carried through the hedges. The story had already spread. The HOA was making an example out of us. Mrs. Collins from across the streets stepped out with her dog. She leaned close, voice shaking. "They came to the Johnsons last week, said their shed violated policy. 2 days later, the shed was burned to the ground. Fire department never found who did it." Her words hung heavy in the air. Later, my wife found another notice taped to our car windshield. $500 fine for improper parking, even though the truck was inside our driveway. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about pressure. Break us down, isolate us, and force us to submit. That night, we heard voices outside again. Not the thugs this time, neighbors. "They're making trouble for the whole street," one hissed. Another replied, "If they just follow the rules, none of us would suffer." I knew this tactic. Divide and conquer. Make us the enemy so no one else dared resist. The next day, inspectors showed up. 2 men in polos with clipboards, snapping photos of our gutters, our fence, even my daughter's bicycle leaning against the garage. When I asked for ID, they flashed HOA badges that looked freshly laminated at a print shop. I stared one of them down. "Step off my property, now." He sneered. "You don't want this to escalate, sir. Just comply. Escalate. That word again. They wanted me rattled. They wanted my wife crying on the porch, but I'd faced worse in deserts half a world away. Still, the pressure was mounting. Every night, headlights slowed in front of our house. Every morning, another bogus fine appeared. And through it all, the HOA president herself, Linda Myers, smiled at us from her manicured lawn like a queen watching her pawns move. The final straw came 3 nights later. A low rumble outside woke me at 3 a.m. I peeked through the blinds. 2 black SUVs had stood in front of our driveway. Doors opened, boots hit the pavement. And this time, they weren't carrying clipboards. Engines idled low, rumbling like a warning growl. I counted 4 men stepping out of the SUVs. No clipboards, no polo shirts. This time it was tactical gear. Black vests, boots, radios clipped to their shoulders, flashing badges that glinted under the street lamp. Too shiny, too fake. My wife clutched the curtain. They look like police. They're not, I whispered. Not even close. One man strode to the porch, heavy boots on the wood, and pounded his fist against the door. Thud, thud, thud. This is an official HOA enforcement action. Step outside. I didn't move. Years of training had drilled into me. You don't step into a trap. You make them come to you, on your terms. Another voice barked from the yard. You've been warned. Surrender your property peacefully, and there won't be trouble. Property. They weren't just bluffing now. They're staging a seizure, using fear, uniforms, and intimidation to break us. From the corner window, I spotted neighbors' blinds twitching. They were watching, always watching, but no one opened a door. No one called out. Fear had made them silent witnesses. I motioned to my wife and daughter, guiding them into the safe room. I'd built after retirement, reinforced steel door, emergency comms, cameras linked to my phone. Stay inside. Don't come out unless I say. The porch groaned again. Another slam against the doorframe. The fake cops wanted in. I moved to the hall closet, retrieving the steel baton I kept for close quarters defense. My firearm stayed locked for now. I wouldn't escalate unless forced. Through the peephole, I caught sight of one man circling to the back, another scanning the windows with a flashlight. They were probing for a weakness. The leader raised his voice. You've got 60 seconds. After that, we enter by force. The countdown began, echoing like a clock ticking toward war. I slipped into the kitchen, crouched low. The back motion sensor blinked red. Someone was at the fence. I heard the faint creak of metal, the slow grind of boots stepping onto my yard. 10 seconds left. I tightened my grip on the baton, heart steady, not racing. This wasn't fear, it was focus. I'd been here before, surrounded, outnumbered, but never outmatched. The leader barked, "Time's up! Breach it!" The front door rattled with a heavy strike. And just as wood splintered under the first blow, I swung the kitchen door open to face the intruder climbing in through the back. The back door swung wide, and the intruder froze under the beam of my kitchen light. His fake badge gleamed against his vest, but his grip faltered when he saw me standing calm, baton raised, eyes locked. Wrong house, I said flatly. He lunged, sloppy, too much weight on his front foot. I sighed, stepped, pivoted, and drove the baton across his ribs. The crack echoed through the night. He staggered, gasping, and collapsed against the counter. From the front I heard the crash of wood as the others forced the door. The house shook. Boots thundered inside. I moved fast, controlled, the way I'd cleared compounds overseas, one threat at a time. The first man rounded the hallway, flashlight up. I snapped the baton down across his wrist. The light clattered to the floor. He howled. My free hand shoved him hard into the drywall, pinning him with precision. The third man appeared, weapon drawn, non-lethal, a taser. He fired. The probes whizzed past, catching fabric but missing skin. My counter was instant. I closed the distance, swung hard across his jaw, and dropped him cold. The leader finally stepped inside, barking orders to the chaos. "Secure him! Do it now!" But the room had gone quiet. His men were groaning on the ground, disarmed and broken. I faced him head-on in the living room. My wife and daughter were safe behind the steel door. I stood alone, but not unarmed. "You thought intimidation would work," I said evenly. "But you picked the wrong family. And the wrong man." His face twisted with rage. He drew a collapsible baton, snapping it open with a flick. He came at me fast, more skilled than his men, but still sloppy. Rage always is. Our weapons clashed, steel against steel. Sparks flew. He swung heavy, wild. I stayed calm, disciplined, parrying each strike, waiting. Finally, he overextended. I trapped his arm, twisted, and dropped him to his knees. My baton pressed against his throat. "You wanted compliance," I whispered. "Now you'll get consequences." He gurgled, struggling, but I kept the pressure controlled, precise, not lethal, just enough. His men watched from the floor, beaten and silent. I leaned closer, voice low, sharp as a blade. They thought they could break me, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. And just as he hit the floor, gasping for air, the distant sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights washed over the cul-de-sac, bouncing off every window, every gear, every neighbor's blinds that had been cracked open all night. This time, people weren't just watching. They were witnessing justice. The first officer through the door froze at the sight. 4 men sprawled on my living room floor, groaning, stripped of their fake authority. Their badges lay scattered like discarded toys. I stood over them, baton still in hand, but lowered, steady. "Hands where we can see them," the officer shouted. I dropped the baton and raised my hands, calm. These men impersonated law enforcement and broke into my home. My family is safe in the secured room. The officers moved quickly, cuffing each intruder. The leader, still wheezing from our fight, tried to protest. "We were acting under HOA authority." The officer cut him off with a sharp glare. "You're under arrest for impersonating an officer, unlawful entry, and assault. HOA authority doesn't cover breaking and entering." One by one, they were dragged out in cuffs. The neighbors poured onto their lawns now, whispering, shaking their heads. The fear that had kept them silent cracked like glass. Some looked at me with relief, others with shame for staying quiet too long. My wife stepped out at last, clutching our daughter's hand. Her eyes locked on me, relief washing over her face. I nodded once. It was over. 2 detectives stayed behind, taking my statement. I laid it all out. The midnight pounding, the fake notices, the SUVs, the trespass, the forced entry. Evidence was everywhere. Splintered wood, boot prints, surveillance footage from my cameras. There was no escaping the charges. Days later, the news hit. The HOA president, Linda Myers, had sanctioned it all. Those men weren't law enforcement. They were hired muscle, paid through HOA funds funneled under security expenses. She was arrested for conspiracy, fraud, and misuse of association money. The HOA board collapsed overnight. Neighbors held an emergency meeting and voted to dissolve it completely. No more bogus fines, no more intimidation, just a community free again. Weeks later, my wife and I sat on the porch. The lawn was quiet, the air still. For the first time in months, headlights slowed, not in menace, but in greeting. Neighbors waved again. Trust was rebuilding. I looked at the empty sign where HOA office used to be. It had been torn down, nothing left but bolts in the concrete. I squeezed my wife's hand. It's done. As the sun set over the cul-de-sac, the only sound left was silence, the kind of silence you earn after a battle won.